the book of Philippians. The book of Philippians is written to the church in Philippi, and the church in Philippi was founded on Paul's second missionary journey. He was there, and he would always go into the synagogue first. And if you read the book of Acts, or you look back at the devotions from the book of Acts, you'll find that every time he went into a city, he went to the synagogue first to give the Jews the first shot at the gospel. Well, in this town, there were so few Jewish people, there wasn't even a synagogue. To have a synagogue, you had to have 10 Jewish men who were heads of households, and there wasn't. So a group of women, and some men, presumably, met by the Gangites River, and one of them was Lydia. And she got saved when Paul came, and she had a big house because she sold purple, which was an expensive linen, and so they began a little church in her home. Well, one day while Paul was out preaching in the street, a fortune-telling girl who was demon-possessed was just following Paul around, saying, you're a prophet, and saying these things to him. And it was true what she was saying, but he didn't want that witness coming out of her. So he cast the demon out. Well, when he cast the demon out, that was great and everything for her. However, she was owned by somebody who made a fortune off of her through fortune telling. And they were mad because they needed that demon. So they went before the magistrates and told that Paul and Silas were a threat to Jewish customs. And the magistrates dragged them in, and they beat them, and they put them in prison. And so what did Paul and Silas do? They praised the Lord. They raised their hands. They were praising the Lord that they were worthy to be, suffering for him. And at midnight, an earthquake came and shook the place, and the doors flew open. No one got hurt. They could have just left. And the Philippian jailer grabbed his sword and was about to kill himself. And Paul said, "Don't do this. We're all still here." And the Philippian jailer said, "What must I do to be saved?" This is all in Acts chapter 16. And so the next day, the magistrates realized that these were Roman citizens that they'd beaten without a trial. And they said, "Hey, look, please, just go. Would you just do us a favor and go?" And that's how the church got started, with that kind of flair. Well, he writes them a letter, and I want you to notice at the beginning of this letter just how much he loves them. We won't have a chance to go much past verse 11, but in the first few verses, you can see his love for them. In verse 3, he says, "I thank my God every time I remember you." Do you have some people on your heart? Do you have some people that are Christians that you just love and you pray for? That is your responsibility as a Christian. If you've been saved for any length of time, you should have some folks in your life that you have led to Christ, and that you're discipling or have discipled and are still on your heart. And that when you think about them, you pray for them. Now, if you can think about someone and pray for them, that tells you that you're walking in the Spirit. You're walking with Christ. If you can think about someone and you don't really pray for them, you're not really walking in the Spirit, in a spirit of prayer where anytime you can just breathe a prayer up to God, then you need to be walking in the Spirit. So he thinks about it, he remembers them, and he prays for them. Verse 4, he says, "In my prayers for you, I always pray with joy." In other words, it gives him joy to think about the Philippian church and the Philippian people. Maybe we lack joy in our lives because we lack some people in our lives. Maybe we lack joy in our lives because we don't have any spiritual children. How long have you been saved? When's the last time you led someone to Christ? If it's been a long time, it's not supposed to be that way. And I'll bet you're not that happy. You get your joy from doing what God called you to do and having spiritual children and praying for them. And here's what he says about his spiritual children. This is true of you too. In verse 6, this is one that you need to memorize. He says, "Being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it to completion till the day of Jesus Christ." That means if God started a work in me, which he did, April 6th, 1989, he is going to complete that work. And there have been some dark days in my Christian life. There have been some days in my Christian life when I'm sure people thought, "Man, you aren't even saved." Or some days when people would have thought, "Man, are you ever going to get it?" Yes, the answer is yes, I am going to get it. You know why? God started the work. And the same is true for you. This is not a verse to say, "Oh, well, a person walked down an aisle, prayed a prayer. They've been living for the devil ever since, but everything is going to be okay." No, there is a change that happens when Christ comes into your life. But there are some days when those are dark days. You slip back. He is going to carry it out to completion. Look at how he feels with his people. In verse 7, he says, I have you in my heart, the center of your thoughts, the center of your being. This is where these people were for Paul. They resided in his heart. In verse 8, he says, for God can testify how I long for you with all the affection of Jesus Christ. He longs for them to be with them. Affection had the idea of internal organs, like my stomach, my whole being just wants you. Do you love people like that? Do you have some people you love like that? Because if you don't, you're missing out on the joy of life, on what God's called you to be. Long for people. Love some people. Choose people you're going to love and pray for those people, and you'll get the feelings for them. Verse 9, he says, and this is how I pray for you. Now, you might want to write this down. This is what he prayed for them. He prayed for their love to abound. If you have people in your life that you really love, here's how you got to pray for them. Pray for their love. They're going to be people of love. That's what our Christian life is really all about. Jesus said, greatest commandment? Okay. 1, love. Love who? Love God. Love your neighbor. On these 2 statements, the entire law and the prophets hang. So we need to have love. And he prays for that. Now, what kind of love? The kind of love that comes in knowledge, he says. In knowledge and depth of insight. Love is not blind. Love is discerning. The word here he uses later is that you may be sincere. It's translated pure in the NIV, but really it's the word sincere, and it comes from the word, the Greek word sincera. It means without wax. What they would do in the first century was pottery folks would make pottery, and then they would get cracks in them, and then they would try to sell them, but they would seal them with wax. Okay? Now, how good is a pot sealed with wax? Well, it's fine until the sun hits it. And when the sun hits it, not only can you see the crack, but if the sun stays on it, the wax can melt out. It's not a pure pot. It's not sincere. And so they would say that I certify this is sincera, without wax. And you could hold it up to the sun, and it was a good pot. It was a very expensive pot. And so God says, this is how I want you to be. Blameless. Not having to cover up parts of your life that aren't good. Be the real deal. And that's how our love needs to be. Sincere, without fault. Pure love. But also love that's discerning. That can tell right from wrong. Love is not blind. Love can see. True love can see. And then he says in verse 11, being filled with the fruit of righteousness. Really, this better translated, the fruit that comes from righteousness. The fruit that comes from righteousness in our lives. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. And they come through Jesus Christ. And why? At the very end of this verse, to the praise and glory of God. That's the purpose of all this. Why would God want love in my life? So that He would get glory and He would be glorified. Well, the bottom line here in Philippians 1 through 11, love some people. Have some people in your life that you love. Christians that you've led to Christ, that you're discipling, that mean everything to you. And your life too will be rich and full like Paul's. Well, God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day.